This is a tribute to Rav Moshe Pesach Goldman. He was my rebbi in 1974, I believe, in the Yeshiva at Ocean Parkway, out my 8th grade rebbi. And I have very warm memories, just to share a few things. Rabbi Goldman was a very, very fine, fair, soft-spoken individual. I remember he taught us, for example, that really on pretzels we should wash according to the Alter Rebbe. That stands out in my mind now, and I know that some Rabbanim hold otherwise, and I'm not going into the halachic issues, but just the fact that here is here's a young 13-year-old boy, 12, 13-year-old boy in his class. And I remember now, so many years later, Rabbi Goldman, at that time, during that year, suffered a great loss. Nebuch, his son Eliezer, I believe that was his name, was murdered in Crown Heights. It was a tragedy for the entire community. And I remember walking on the block, I think on Montgomery Street, because he lived on Montgomery Street, walking behind the casket. I know the Rebbe came out also in front of 770. And I remember that after this tragedy, in the Yeshiva, there were times when he said Kaddish and he davened for the Yomid. I don't know if he davened for the Yomid, but he broke down. I still remember like now, and it was so painful, to see our Rebbe, our teacher, have this great pain. And it's like it happened yesterday. So, a person lives a long life. Rabbi Goldman was the treasurer or the secretary of Tzidei Agudas Chabad. From the very beginning, he worked with Reb David Raskin. And Reb David Raskin was a Russian. Rabbi Goldman was an American. And my understanding is that some of the early Mivtzoyim, outreach things, Hanukkah and the Purim, Shleach Monas, were he initiated them, he suggested them. In the 1950s, before, Shlichus and Shluchim was a thing and became popular, it wasn't that way. And he had the vision together with some others, but he took a lead role in this. And we look back now 70 years, and we need to thank him for it, because who doesn't go today and give out menorahs and light menorahs and do Mitzvah Hanukkah and Shleach Monas and Matzah and Lulav and Esrog. But in those days, it wasn't fashionable. On the contrary, there was a lot of criticism by others. They didn't relate to this, running around with Yiddishkeit, with Torah, with mitzvahs in public. You're a Jew in shul, you're a Jew at home, but in the street, you're like everyone else. The Rebbe called for something else. The Rebbe called for an offensive war. A defensive war is not enough, because we're living in a time of great assimilation. And Rabbi Goldman took a great part of this approach and in this offensive war. So he was a kind of an unassuming, quiet man, but he was fire in leading this. Again, I'm not saying he was the only one, but definitely amongst the leaders. In observing him as a Rebbe, I saw his frumkeit, his religiosity, his emeskite, his truthfulness, and his chiddushkeit. In various ways, it's hard to articulate, details, but I recall how, here I am, a 12, 13, became 13-year-old boy, became bar mitzvah in his class. Many of us became bar mitzvah in Rabbi Goldman's class. You're told, you're putting on tefillin and you're maturing, and then that's why you're starting now. You're mitzvahs, you're obligated to mitzvahs, and it's a new beginning. And it was during his class, the year that we were in his class. So the messages, besides the learning, he taught us Gemara, whether it was Baba Kama, Baba Tzia, whatever we were learning, the overall messages were very palpable and very long-lasting that we picked up during that time. So Hashem took his neshama back, 96 years. And by the way, he grew up in Brownsville. He grew up in a Chabad shul, a Nusachari shul, on Watkins Avenue. I actually went out there several years ago, but it's no longer standing. It's been replaced by a promenade and buildings, city buildings. It's pretty rough out there, but I went during the day and made it back, Baruch Hashem. But there was a shul, Anshi Lubavitch, I think it was called. The Rav was Rabbi Dachowitz, I believe. He wasn't a Lubavitch, he was a Talmud Chacham, and he was a good friend of Lubavitch, of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe, the Rashag. And Rabbi Goldman grew up in that shul. I spoke to him once or twice about it. There's a picture of that shul from 1940, surveillance, tax records, they took pictures. So he grew up in that shul. In that shul, in 1929, the Frierdiker Rebbe said a mimer, I think Rosh Hashanah, and Rabbi Jacobson, Yisrael Jacobson writes in his book, in his memoirs, he writes that there were 2,000 people because he had a shul nearby and he knew what's going on and he was involved in all that. There were 2,000 people listening to the mimer in that shul, and he said he couldn't get in yet, was standing outside sometime during Rosh Hashanah. So he grew up in that environment. He also was, when he was in 770 to 1940s, he together with his brother-in-law, Rabbi Rosenfeld, Rabbi Rosenfeld, Shalom, and the Posner boys, they were sent, Label Posner, they were sent to Chicago. I believe they started a Lubavitch Yeshiva there. It lasted a year or two or so. And he was one of the, what they would call today, Bocherim Shluchim. And so he was, very important in the sense of helping to establish a Lubavitch Yeshiva at the time. Then it closed and it reopened today with all kinds of institutions and yeshivas and girls' schools and all of that. But in those days, Chicago wasn't a Chabad haven, even though there were some Lubavitch Rabbonim, Reb Shlomo Zalman Hecht, and later Rabbi Schusterman, Reb Herschel Schusterman. Herschel Schusterman wasn't there in 1946 when Rabbi Goldman was sent. Rabbi Hecht was. But there was some other Rabbonim, Lubavitch Rabbonim. But pretty much it was, governed by, governed. I mean, it was the Beis Medrash, I forget now, Litvish institution was the mainstay in that city. It was more of a Litvish, city at the time. Anyway, Rabbi Goldman, of course, his father-in-law was Rabbi Yoel Simpson, the Rashab's Chassid, the masker, the secretary of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Yechida secretary, the Chayzer, Rabbi Simpson, our Rav here, who I had my mitzvah with in his shul. He was still alive in 1974. So he was Rabbi Goldman's father-in-law, as well as Rabbi Roosevelt's father-in-law. Anyway, lots of memories. Schusse Yogan Aleinu, Kitzur Anu Sheikh Ne'ofar, and I wish the family to bereavement and consolement, and my good friend, his youngest son, Rabbi Yeshua ben Yamin Goldman today, who is the shliach, I think, in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. May you and your entire family only have simchas and no more tzar, and continue all the hafotz hamayonos chutza and the bali tshuva and outreach and teaching Torah and chassidus, and ultimately this should all bring Mashiach Tzidkenu, that Rabbi Goldman and everyone else will be resurrected, and we'll see our rebbi beinenu with our eyes, and we'll be zeicha to binya beis hamikdash. Amen. Aksivach simatoiva, good kebed to everyone. Thank you.